Hi, welcome to this video about FileMaker Design Basics. It is a video linked to the website fmstarter.com, and this is a public video, available on YouTube just to show some nice FileMaker elements, some FileMaker design basics. This video is for FileMaker developers. This is not to teach design as a concept, but to teach design tools as available in FileMaker. It's a pragmatic approach to design options you will find in FileMaker. I just created a new FileMaker file, and this is the file presented. If I go to layout mode, I see that there is a theme applied called Apex Blue. I click on this icon right next to the title here and see it's Apex Blue. By changing to another theme, I can have a small preview of those other themes. And you see that there is a change in lighting and there's a change in colors, and there are all kind of different settings here, but we'll stick to this basic Apex Blue as just started with. And that's it. So basically what you see here is like a theme or a style sheet attached now to this layout. And the layout in FileMaker is created automatically. If you create a new file, a new table is created and a layout is then attached to that same table. And then a theme is applied, and the theme is a style sheet which defines elements on that layout. And here is a first thing which is confusing. If you look at other languages like German, for example, the theme is called a design, and that is simply misleading. That's not the case. The design is not the style sheet. A design is the complexity of how you present an interface to the user with a specific purpose behind it, that the user can use the software. The design is just here to help the user get access to all the functionality of the solution. So the design is not a set of styles, and it's not a style sheet, because you still have to apply, according to your design, whatever that is, these object settings to the objects and create a full page with it, which is also about composition, about style, about white space where you have nothing in it, about positioning, about the usage of each layout, be it for a website application or for a standard desktop application or a mobile application. You have to define the usage for each layout, and that might be different. So if you look at the design options, there are plenty of design options, but a theme is not the design. It's the theme in the background as applied here to this layout. And let we see this again. It's called, the theme is Apex Blue. It comes with all kinds of object settings, which are styles attached to objects and layout parts. And these settings have like a similar look and feel to it. So they might use the same basic colors, they might use the same font throughout all settings, etc., etc. Now, these settings are useful, but they are not the design in itself. You cannot create a design by loading a theme. That does not help. If you want to look for a good design, there are many things you can ask yourself, and let's talk about a few of these things. There is a famous saying by Steve Jobs: design is not just what it looks like and feels like, design is how it works. And that's quite an important summary of what the design aims to do. So design is never about itself. An interface design is not about, look how pretty am I. A design of an interface for a software has a purpose, namely to make the software as easy to use as possible. And design is how it works, just refers to that. It's just simply a reflection of how it works. And that must be simple, it must be understandable, and it must be intuitive. Now, The word intuitive in software design has a lot to do with what people are used to, but it also is something that by its simplicity helps. One design rule is make it simpler and reduce to the max. And that reduction is how you get closer to the user and a good experience of the user. So a good example of this is, for example, Google, who introduced a website with a simple single field and a single button. You can fill in your search phrase in the field and then click a single button, and that was revolutionary. Another big shift appeared when the iPhone was introduced, and with it, a whole visual attitude changed. So while there were huge applications in use on desktop computers in the time, applications for mobile phones became the pinnacle of simplicity, reduced to a single function, simple buttons, very simple interface. That became like the pinnacle of design after the introduction of the single field Google solution. And these things were then transferred to software design. So of course there still are very complicated interfaces available today, but for a majority of tools, the interfaces became much more simple. And the question is, how can we design in FileMaker simple interfaces? And that is about accessibility, it is about performance, it is about a ton of things you have to consider before you can get into a design. So who is using the software? What kind of information do they need? What kind of information can they enter in this screen? How many screens can there be? And more of these questions. But now let's turn to FileMaker and see how it is easy to introduce a design into FileMaker by using a few simple tools. We're back at our sample file. In this sample file, there is no data. There's just a table. There are no extra fields, nothing. But the basics of design, as from a perspective of tools in FileMaker, can be well explained here. You do not need a lot. So what you do is to consider design as something you want to be able to repeat. Now, there are two things which help in creating a repeatable design. One is the grid in the background, and we'll get to that just in a second. And the second is the themes or style sheets, which help you to repeat certain visual patterns. And so these two, the grid and the style sheets, are the two biggest helps you can get in FileMaker. How do you get to the grid? Well, there are two options. First of all, in any window, on any layout, you will see there is this button called Edit Layout. If you click on it, you will change to layout mode, and there is exit layout to get out again. And the same is true if you go to the view menu. You have here browse mode, find mode, layout mode, and preview mode. Here simply switch to layout mode. In layout mode, you will see that the window appearance changes. You now have like a certain right menu and also a left menu, and we'll stick to the right menu here. And you will see there is a theme and style mentioned here, a position and an appearance. Now in layout mode, there is an option to show the grid. So this is the option. If I show the grid, it will immediately switch on a grid to appear in the background of your layout. And this is the layout mode only. So it will not appear in any regular browse mode as you use the software. It's just for the layout mode. And if you look, there is a width here like 36.124 centimeters, and the major grid spacing is 1 centimeter, and you can change the measurements here by clicking on centimeters or points. I usually work with points, as also the font sizes are usually in points. And it makes no sense that you change everything to a metric system or to a non-metric system. I use them both, and fonts in points are so familiar that I also set the major grid spacing to points just to have a reference if I work with font sizes. And here I go for a 30-point regular, and the 30 point is quite a large gap. So you see it by the darker gray lines here. It's a 30 to 30 grid. And in between appears another line. It's a light gray line, and this just cuts that major grid space into two parts vertically and two parts horizontally. And these are called the minor grid steps. So this is set here to 2. I can change it to 3. And now I have like multiple lines. I have 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines here, which just cut the major grid into smaller pieces. And logically, if I have a 30 point divided by 3, each of these steps is 10 point. And these differentiation between major and minor grid steps is helpful. You should choose for your layout an important, bigger step. Why? Because you will be able to draw all your objects on this grid. Do not make it too small, and certainly not smaller as this 30 point. Probably get a 40 point if you're working for web sizes or iOS appliances, for example, but not smaller because it gets too small. And the minor grid steps, they are just in place for rare occasions where you need to switch a single object, for example, a few pixels down or up or something like this. But the grid will be the space where you draw objects. So let's say you want to draw an object on the grid. You will have to activate Snap to Grid to make that simple. So Snap to Grid and Show Grid are your helpers. Now let's first click on the top navigation here. And if we click on it, then the position will be blended in, and it's 110 points in height. And that is not on the grid size. So it's not a multiple of the 30-point grid. So I'll change that to 120. And if I do so, I see that the upper part is neatly linked to the grid I set already. And I can do this with any part of the layout by clicking it on the left side. And then I can change this to, let's say, 660, which always is a multiple of the 30 I started with. So the basic position of the grid is 30 points, and there are minor grid steps which I use in rare occasions, but the main part I will be using the major grid space. Now let's draw some objects on the grid. And tools are in the upper menu bar here. So let's select a shape tool like the rectangle. And now I can create and draw on the grid a rectangle which exactly fits on the grid. And if I do this with every single object, these objects will all look harmonious. So of course there's more than just using the grid just anywhere. Of course you are going to use specific locations, but the basic is that you can use the grid to make this very simple. And so you draw this element on the grid. Then of course you can choose a style. So it's a rectangle, and you can choose, let's say, a filled example. So this is now with the theme in the background linked to a certain style of object. And I can change that as well, of course. So I can have now an inner shadow, for example, or I can just select, I have to select the object first and then can choose something else. So that is quite helpful. So the grid is a help, and other tools just work the same. For example, if I want to have like a button bar, I can select the button bar and just use it here to draw this on my grid. So let's say I have a button bar here with, let's say, start, and then I go to the next one and I say list, and the next one, and I go to settings. I now have a button bar with 3 buttons, and because it's drawn on the interface using the grid, I know that it's quite easy to move it around and also to make it start at the same position on every single layout. So I can now adjust this because I see there rounded edges. I don't want rounded edges here at the top. So I click on the object and then I can select more things here according to this selection. So I'm using here the settings of the object and I can now save this to the current style. So the red icon indicates that something changed. Now I can change it to the current style or save it as a new style. If I save it as a new style, I can give a new name. So this is like for the top menu and it's version 01, for example. And then I can save that back to the theme. So that's a basic way of working. So if I click here on a single element, I get the segment settings and I can define the segment settings. So if I don't do that, I have like the entire button bar and I get all the settings for the button bar. And I don't want, for example, the top line. So I want to get rid of that. And then there are dividers, of course, and the dividers are something I can as well click on. So if I click on an element, I can also here select the dividers and make them any color I want or transparent. And so I can work with the grid and to simplify my life. And then I use the styles to style the object I drew on the grid. And this together makes implementation of a design, of any design, quite easy. So probably if you're working with a graphic designer, you can show him these options and he can present to you like a basic understanding of a design and help you to get it right. So he will create a design, you will implement it, and that will be just fine. And if you want to try this for yourself, go ahead, use this setting and then change themes and look for a theme that more or less fits your needs and then go from there. But you will have to make probably just adaptations to your specific solution. Here a short insight into one of our products. This is FM Designer, and FM Designer is a series of 10 themes for FileMaker. And I'll show you one to show you that it's using exactly what was discussed in this single video. So I start by defining the grid size. So the grid size here is 30 to 30 points. And if you switch on the layout mode, it will show you that exactly every object here in this layout is positioned on the grid. And this is an absolute phenomenal help to create a consistency in your layouts and design. So the grid is about consistency, and the same applies for the theme. So these are 10 themes and each comes with an own color set and some basic settings, but that is another video and that's another product. But it's true for almost any of our solutions that we use the grid and extensive themes to come to the result we can present as a good product. So this is essential knowledge for any FileMaker developer who wants to improve his design.